All right, so in recent years, you probably heard from guys like Peter Attia, maybe even Andrew Huberman, about your VO2 max and how it is sort of the ultimate measure of endurance and fitness. But what if I told you that's not the full story? It's a huge part of the story. VO2 max is absolutely a huge part of the story. It is a great number that you should know, but it's not the full story. And what I want to talk about is some of the factors around VO2 that'll improve your VO2, but also sometimes matter a little bit more than VO2 when it comes to your performance. Now, a quick side before we really dive in. If you have no idea what VO2 max means, here's a really simple way to understand it. Your VO2 max is simply a measure of how efficiently your body uses oxygen to produce energy for performance. So your VO2 stands for your volume of oxygen, your VO max. What is the maximum volume of oxygen that you can use to generate energy, performance, move, exercise, exist? So for example, if an elite runner has a VO2 max of 80, but Couch Potato Dave has a VO2 max of 40, the runner can use 70 or 80 milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body weight per minute. You can use almost double the oxygen per minute to produce energy compared to Dave the Couch Potato. You want a higher VO2 because it's essentially your body's capacity or efficiency. It's a hybrid car with 50 miles per gallon versus a gas guzzler, right? So today we're going to talk about 5 factors to think about as it relates to your VO2 and that affect your VO2. And number 3 is actually one that people don't think about very often. That's a hook, but it's also very true. I'm Dr. Mark, and I've worked with everyone from elite athletes to everyday go-getters, helping them to optimize their performance, recovery, and overall health. So let's jump into the first nuance. VO2 max is not the best predictor of performance. It's good to have a high VO2 max, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee athletic success. So an example here is Olympic marathon champion Frank Shorter had a VO2 max of around 71, so a relative VO2 max, so 71 milliliters per kilogram per minute, which is lower than many of his competitors, but his running economy was elite, and we'll talk more about that later. There's another marathoner, Derek Clayton, who set a marathon record with a VO2 max of just 69 milliliters per kilogram per minute. That is far below other sports. When I was playing college hockey, I measured at around 68. I was not a marathon runner. So what are some other factors that Frank Shorter might have had, that Derek Clayton might have had, that matter? One is your lactate threshold. So how fast can you go? How hard can you push before lactate starts to build up and starts to actually slow you down? What is that threshold? What is your running economy? How much energy do you use per stride? What do your biomechanics look like? How efficient, how good are your tires? And then you've got to have just the mental game. What is your fatigue resistance? What is your pacing strategy? How much grit do you have? And how well do you know your sport to play the game within the game, even if that's just running? So a solution here is, instead of just chasing a higher VO2 max, start to work on the mind game, start to work on the efficiency, start to work on the lactate threshold and other factors that aren't just this end stage volume of oxygen number. Nuance number 2 is that VO2 max is not just about your heart and your lungs. And this is a little more gritty and academic and didactic, but when we think about VO2, your heart and your lungs, we're looking at your respiratory rate, your oxygen exchange, we're looking at your cardiac output, a bunch of numbers that you'd know if you're in kind of the physiology world. But these are central. These are things that are right here. They're central adaptations. If I can get my heart more efficient and pumping more blood per pump, that's a good thing. It's probably going to affect my VO2. But if my peripheral adaptations, if my capillary beds and my mitochondria aren't there to extract the oxygen, it's a lost cause. So your VO2 max measures oxygen uptake. All the oxygen you took in and all the oxygen that leaves, what's the difference? How much oxygen did you use? You need efficient mitochondria to actually use that oxygen. So the difference between elite athletes and average athletes, or even just the average person, isn't always just the heart function. It's not that they necessarily always have a stronger heart. It might just be muscle efficiency and oxygen extraction in the periphery from their training. So one of the solutions here, if you're trying to get that adaptation, is to strength train and to do zone 2 training that you'll hear, again, Peter Attia talking about a lot. But this lower intensity training, muscular endurance training, things that require extraction and sort of a consistent energy output so that you can stimulate capillary growth, stimulate mitochondrial growth to improve that extraction, not just the movement, the central movement of oxygen. Nuance number 3, this was from the hook. So if you came here from the beginning, I applaud you for sticking around. This is the idea that strength training equals cardio. And I still see this being thrown around. And I love Dr. Kenneth J is an exercise physiologist researcher in the cardiovascular training space. Heart rate spikes don't mean you're training cardio. Just because your heart rate is high does not mean you're training cardio. If that was true, Kenneth J's quote that I love is, if just raising your heart rate was cardio, I could scare you into better shape. That's not how that works. So many people assume that lifting weights fast, doing weights in a circuit fashion, lifting heavy weights, anything that gets this kind of going and faster, that's not cardio. This could be a whole separate video, and maybe it will be someday, but strength training does improve force production. It will actually make your heart thicker. We see that powerlifters have very thick walls on their heart, but it does not tax the cardiovascular system in a way that improves VO2 max. If you want to improve VO2 max, if you want to improve how much oxygen you move and use, you need to do classic, frankly, boring cardio strategies. You need to run, you need to row, you need to cycle, you need to swim, you need to cross-country ski, you need to do something that is large-bodied rhythmic contractions with low resistance so that you don't get compensatory heart rate increases rather than VO2 linear heart rate increases. Nuance number 4, when we look at the extremes of VO2 max, you'll find that it doesn't really matter for the average person. So some people try to chase really insane VO2 numbers. You're trying to bump it up as high as you can, but it doesn't necessarily make you better. We've got evidence of this in that the highest VO2 max ever recorded was around 97, 98 from Norwegian cyclist Oscar Svensson. I apologize if whoever hears this, but despite this, he actually never became a world-class competitor. His huge aerobic engine, his huge ability to move and use oxygen didn't actually translate to performance. So beyond a certain point, a VO2 doesn't necessarily mean higher performance. On that note, though, research on mortality risk and longevity and your health shows that higher VO2 max is almost always better. There doesn't appear to be a too high a VO2 max for your health. It just appears there might be diminishing returns or no real benefit for performance, for athletic performance. Nuance number 5 would actually be looking at how you want to train your VO2. How do you want to build your VO2? And I think the person I've heard be the loudest on this is Peter Attia. Kenneth J talks about it a lot, but you gotta know who he is and read his book. But it's sort of an 80-20 approach to training. 80% of your training should actually be lower intensity, zone 2 work. Again, to get the capillary changes, to get the mitochondrial density changes, to get your ability to extract the oxygen and just use your heart for a long time. We see a difference in heart remodeling. So athletes tend to have bigger hearts and stronger hearts. And what does that look like? Endurance athletes have bigger hearts because their chambers are larger, they're stretchier, they're more elastic, and they can move more blood. Strength people have thicker hearts. So they have strong hearts and they're used to dealing with big pressures as they deadlift and clean and do all this stuff. But it doesn't necessarily lead to more blood moved. So when you're thinking about your training, you want to actually stretch the heart and make a big, I think it's Kenneth J also who says, you want a heart of elastic steel. You want a big, strong heart of elastic steel. And the idea is that it can stretch and move and is pliable and can really move blood, and not just this thick, stiff, rigid thing. And one of the best ways to do that is to have it work under a low rhythmic load, true cardio, running, cycling, rowing, swimming, skiing, cross-country skiing. And that should make up about 80% of your training. The other 20% should be high intensity. And it's not based on a heart rate threshold. It doesn't always work. You want to actually start to work off velocities. You want to know, this is finding someone who can test you, what your velocity of VO2 max is. How fast do you have to be running? What do you have to be rowing? What do you have to be cycling where you actually hit your VO2 max, where you can't extract or move any more oxygen? And you need to train above that. The principle of overload. You've got to train higher than your VO2 to build your VO2. I know it's a kind of confusing. So an example protocol that Peter Attia recommends all the time, and this is public, which is why I'm saying it. It's not my idea. It's his. 4 minutes of all-out effort. And if you know bioenergetics, you cannot go 4 minutes all out, but it is 4 minutes going near or above your VO2 max. And that doesn't necessarily mean your heart rate max. And then you're doing 4 minutes of recovery. And then you repeat that 4 to 6 times. And that would be about 20% of your training. I believe he does that once or twice a week. And the rest of it is zone 2 cardio, rucksack walks, very low jogs, very light cycling, things that keep you in kind of a 65 to 75% of your heart rate max range to build mitochondrial density and blood flow through capillaries and things like that. So there you have it. More about VO2 than you probably ever wanted to know. So if this helped, you learned something, you liked it, go ahead and hit the like button, go ahead and subscribe, comment, do all the YouTube things. It's free for you. It helps me. Until next time, I'm Dr. Mark.